Stephen Sindoni grew up in the streets of New York City, surrounded by people of many backgrounds, ethnicities. This aroused curiosity about the human condition and need to understand just what makes people choose the path they do. Such was the case when he came across the legend of J.C. Brown, the man who claimed to have discovered a lost city in Shasta Mountain with hidden treasure and the remnants of a legendary society. The body of his work includes the following. Sindoni says, I said, The Planet X Factor, Trailer Park, Temp Agency, and The Legend of J.C. Brown. Stephen Sindoni. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Good evening, George. How are you tonight?
Good. I just want to pronounce it again. Ethnicities. There you go. I got it out.
You've got it, yes.
Mount Shasta, called the Magic Mountain. How come?
Well, Native Indians claim that our descendants, our true descendants, were from the Lemurian continent of Mu that sunk 15,000 years ago near the Pacific Ocean. And these ancient people went into the mountain to live in the hollows of the earth and still live there today.
Now, the legend of J.C. Brown. Tell me about this.
Well, initially, I was looking for a story to write for a screenplay. And I went on the Internet and I saw the legend of J.C. Brown. So I decided to read it. And I was fascinated by it. And being fascinated by it, I decided I was going to spend 2 weeks in a New York Public Library to research the clues that I had read in the legend.
Now, for some people who might not know about Mount Shasta, it's a majestic mountain. It's part of the Cascade Mountain Range. It is in Northern California, 45 miles from the Oregon border, and it has an extinct volcano, which rises to a height of, over 14,000 feet, Stephen? Isn't that true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's one of the largest volcanic peaks here in the continental United States. A rare place indeed. What is the magic of this mountain?
Well, the magic is that the Lemurian people, who are our true descendants of North America, have high powers. They are mystical people and have the power of telepathy, and they have technology that's far beyond that we've ever had on this planet that we know of. And these people took that technology with them after their continent perished and decided to go underground, and that's where they are today.
Why Mount Shasta?
Well, they said that Mount Shasta was one of the first places that was inhabited on the earth, so it's a holy place.
Okay, now are they still there?
Yes.
How far deep?
Well, initially they were 11 miles deep, and but that was initially at the time J.C. Brown discovered one of the villages there that he had encountered. But they are probably many miles from there now, but that was where he had discovered remnants of an ancient civilization.
Is it just one opening there, Stephen, or many?
Well, there's one opening there, but there are many openings throughout the world that can be accessed to reach the hollows of the earth.
Well, that's true. Now, in this particular case, J.C. stumbled into it. How long did he stay there?
Well, what happened was J.C. Brown turns up in 1934 at the office of the editor of the Stockton Record newspaper. And he tells a story to the editor that 30 years before, while working for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England, he was employed as a geologist to look for gold and prospect in Mount Shasta. He claimed to them that in a second trip up there, he noticed a rock formation that didn't seem right. And on further inspection, he started to dig. And upon digging, he noticed there was a cave. He went in with his lantern and mining paraphernalia, and 3 miles into the tunnel that spiraled downward within the mountain, he found gold mining ore from a civilization that had mined earlier. He decided to go deeper, and he went 8 miles deeper, which now he's at 11 miles depth. And when he got to 11 miles depth, he saw a village and with streets. And as he continued on, he found rooms and chambers. And when he found the rooms and chambers, what he noticed, there were artifacts there from ancient civilizations. He found gold. He found hieroglyphics. He found plates that were had drawings on them tempered steel, spears, and other objects made of gold. And he knew he was onto something. Upon further discovery, he came across other rooms that turned into chambers with places of worship. He found 13 statues that were made of copper and gold, and a sun that was designed from golden streamers with metal that we don't even today have the ability to create. He noticed while he was in his room that things were strewn about, and it looked as if people were there, but they must have left at the spur of the moment. So he realized that, this place had been occupied. He then went into another chamber, and this is where he made a rather bizarre discovery. He discovered 27 skeletons, the smallest of which was 6.5 feet, and the largest of which was 10 feet tall.
Jeez, giants.
Yes. Then he discovered there were 2 of the bodies were mummified, but each were clad in ornate robes, and he thought that they would be their kings and queens. So he made an unbelievable discovery while he was in this mine shaft. Now, after he made this discovery, he decided he was going to cover up the tunnel and conceal it, and that someday in the future he would return and he would mark the entrance on a map so he knew where it was, and then later he would return with enough people so that way they can catalog the items, document it, and then he would register his find.
But he didn't want anyone else to stumble into it.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Did he ever go back?
Yes, he did. In the legend, he claimed that after he met with the editor of the newspaper, the editor of the newspaper introduced him to Harry Noyes Pratt. And Harry Noyes Pratt was a director of the Hagen Museum in Stockton, California.
And what time period are we talking about here, Steve?
This was then 1934.
Okay.
So he shows up 30 years later in the office of the editor, convinces the editor that, he has an unbelievable find for the lost continent of Lemuria. The editor now gets the Hagen Museum curator involved, and they grill him, they question him, and they both are under the opinion that this man is telling the truth. So they then enlist a man by the name of John C. Root, who is a retired printer, and John C. Root becomes the organizer for the group. So then for the next 6 weeks, starting in April 34 till June 19th of that year in 1934, they were holding meetings at John C. Root's home twice a day. Now, in those meetings, J.C. Brown was telling them of the artifacts and things he had found, and he needed 80 people to go up to Mount Shasta with him on the expedition. And he told them the expedition would be done at his expense. He told them at that time he was worth $40 million, and he'd provide a boat for everybody to go up there. Now, on June 19th, before they were supposed to go, he told everyone there that if they wanted to back out, they could.
Right.
But he had been kidnapped in some of his trips going back up to the mountain, and he almost lost his life. And he said later in life, after he retired from the Lord Cowjay Mining Company, his family wanted to come up to the mountain with him, to find the claim. And he said once he told his family, they started to die mysteriously one by one, and then he had another accident where he was almost killed. So he was fearful for his life. So the curator of the museum wanted to see some sort of evidence to prove that he actually did find something up in Mount Shasta. So J.C. Brown at that point told him that he had a bank vault in a Texas bank with photographs and papers to prove his claim was correct. And the curator, Harry Noyes Pratt, said, well, I want to see those before I even, venture up there with you. So I'll provide them for you later today because I have them. Well, later today, which was June 19th of 1934, 80 people waited at 1 p.m. at the Stockton Harbor. They waited, but nobody showed up. J.C. Brown never showed up. People waited about 12 hours, George, and at that point they got rather concerned and they called in the Stockton police. So now the Stockton police come in and they do their investigation. But they could find no J.C. Brown, no hide or hair of him. they could find no crime committed because after interviewing the 80 people, they found out he never took a dime. And the people were adamant about the fact that they believed that this J.C. Brown was worth $40 million and that he would have provided a yacht, but something made him change his mind.
And we don't even know if that was his real name now, do we?
Correct, right. Now, after reading this story, George, I thought he was a charlatan. I thought this was a con. I figured I'm going to be writing about a con man. Mm-hmm. So I decided I was going to spend 2 weeks in the New York Public Library with the 8 clues that I read on the internet, and I got from the Stockton Record, I got the original newspaper article that was written on June 19th of 1934. So I went with that and what I read on the internet, and I took those 8 clues that I had, and I went to the New York Public Library, and I started to research what information I had to see if I was going to come up with something or it would still remain a legend after my couple weeks of research.
What did you find?
Well, interesting enough, the first clue that I had was the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So I decided to see if there was a man by the name of Lord Cowdray. Lo and behold, I Googled the name. There was a Lord Cowdray. Initially, his birth name was Sir Wheatman Pearson. Now, Wheatman Pearson is now the Pearson Company. I believe they're Penguin Books. They were they're a big old conglomerate. And I said, well, wait a minute. I've got the guy. And then I looked a little further, George. I said, well, let me see the age. Well, J.C. Brown was supposedly about 79 years old when he arrived in the office of the editor in 1934.
79? He was way up there. Stay with us, Stephen. We're going to come back, finish up the rest of our story with you, and then we'll take phone calls with you, too, because I'm sure you're fascinated with the Mount Shasta story. We'll be back. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Noory as we talk about the legend of J.C. Brown and Mount Shasta with Stephen Sindoni. Stephen, you're talking about the clues, and the first being, of course, the mining company. Go ahead.
Right. Well, the first clue was the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. And lo and behold, the company did exist. I was able to Google it, and there was the company. And I found out that the man of the company was named Lord Cowdray, but he wasn't named Lord Cowdray initially. He was, as I mentioned earlier, born Sir Wheatman Pearson. So after learning this, and I went to the New York Public Library, the genealogy department, but after learning this on their computer upstairs, I went downstairs in the genealogy department, and I started to go through birth records, death records, border crossings, marriage, and anything I could on Sir Wheatman Pearson to find out if he, in fact, was the J.C. Brown. Well, the first thing I learned, he was about the right age. I went through the border crossings, and I found about 10 border crossings into the States. I found a couple through Mexico, and I was looking for 1904 specifically. Mm-hmm. I found 1904 coming through Laredo, Texas border. When I found that on the manifest, I noticed that he came in with 2 other civil engineers, and J.B. Body, who's also a civil engineer. So those names, J.B. Body's name stuck out. The other 2 civil engineers I was going to research later. I came up a little roadblock there because in that library they didn't have his death records. So I went to the Mormon church, tried to get it. I couldn't get it. I then went to the Science Library on 34th Street, and I was able to find his autobiography. Once I was able to pull the autobiography for Lord Cowdray, I discovered that he died in 1927. So now that kind of put me at an obstacle course because the man I'm looking for shows up in 1934. Mm-hmm. So I go back to the counter and I ask a woman by the name of Marguerite Nealon, who works there at the Science Library at 34th Street, if she could find me a book on the American Society of Civil Engineers, because in the autobiography of Lord Cowdray, it mentioned he was a civil engineer. And I'm thinking, well, whoever this man is has to be a civil engineer, because Lord Cowdray came in 1904, just like the man in the legend J.C. Brown claims. But I couldn't find him coming in 1907. So I said, well, he had to have told somebody, or maybe it was somebody other than the initial engineers that he brought over on the first trip. Well, Marguerite Nealon found this book for me. She said, you know, it's funny you say that, but a week ago I came across a book on American Society of Civil Engineers. She says, wait right here, I'll get it for you. So she went and got it. I thumbed through the book and noticed that Lord Cowdray had died in 27, as I had learned, and then I looked further and I found 3 other lieutenants that he had who were all civil engineers. And I looked at the names to see if the names matched the 1904 crossing through Laredo, Texas. One of the 4 names matched. It was J.B. Body.
J.B. Body, yeah.
Now,
Okay.
J.B. Body was actually John Benjamin Body, which I learned through the microfilm. So now I wanted to study more of J.B. Body. So what I did then, I then got another microfilm to read, and I was able to find his memoirs through the American Society of Civil Engineers, which put his death at May 23rd of 1940. So here it is. I have a man who was born in 1867, who was about 70 years old at the time, 1934, that the man shows up at the Stockton editor's office. So I've got a man who's late in age, who worked his whole life for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company, who came in from Mexico with Lord Cowdray in 1904. So I says, maybe I've got a bullseye here. So I then took the memoirs with me, and I went back to the library on 42nd Street, and I decided to now look very closely at all of J.B. Body's border crossings into the United States and through Mexico. What I learned and discovered was that in 1907, just as J.C. Brown had claimed that he had found the treasure on his second trip up to Mount Shasta, when I went through J.B. Body's second border crossing through Laredo, Texas, I found him coming into the country with 3 other engineers that were working with him in Mexico for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So now I realized I had a bullseye, that the first time he came up with his boss, who gave him permission to go back up there in 1907 to bring 3 civil engineers with him. One of the civil engineers he brought with him was from South Africa. One was from Germany, born in Austria, and the other fellow was born in Scotland, all working in Mexico at the time. So he brought these 3 engineers through the Laredo border. They got on the Union Pacific Railroad, and they took the train up to Dunsmuir, California. And from there, that was a big mining town in those days, they went 11 miles up to the mountain, where they then went up to the mountain to discover what they found up in the hollows of Mount Shasta.
Gee, well, so J.B. Body, you believe, was truly J.C. Brown?
Yes.
All right. Now, the claims, of course, are incredible. What other proof do we have that these people still reside down there? Because J.C. Brown, J.B. Body, never saw the individuals, right?
Right, but he saw the mummifications, he saw the skeletons.
Is it possible that there's nobody down there anymore?
That's a possibility. They might have moved further because of human intervention. I will tell you this. Upon further research and study, I realized why J.B. Body and his party of civil engineers decided to keep the secret. And basically it was because of the American Indian. Our Native Americans knew early in the 1840s when the first colonialists went through that area and told them about the people that were living in the hollows of the earth. In 1851, Reddick McKee, one of our colonels from the United States Army, and this is documented by his official recorder. The guy's name was George Gibbs, and you can look this up. This is on record. You can Google this. But there was a treaty to be signed with 13 of the tribes. Look this up. This is on record. You can Google this. But there was a treaty to be signed with 13 of the tribes in Mount Shasta. This is in 1851. The night before, they had a big feast. The day of the signing, the soldiers said they were going to cook a big meal for the Indians, for the celebration. At that meal, 3,000 braves were poisoned. They put strychnine in the beef and in the bread. There were only 150 survivors at that massacre, one of which was named Tyree Jim, which is a little boy. He was allowed to watch it. But what he said was that most of the braves died there at the signing, and some on the trail on the way home, and that he and who the others that were left picked up the remains and took back the Indians back to the village to be buried.
Jeez.
In the following year, in 1852, and this is all you can look this all up. I want anyone listening to this to challenge whatever I'm saying, to research it, because they'll realize why the Indians are on reservations today. But in the 1852 census, there were only 27 Shasta Indians left in that area. Thereafter, it was decided upon by our government that all the Indians must be put on reservations to keep the most guarded secret, so that way history would not have to be rewritten.
Did they find anything that would have shown high technology?
J.C. Brown claimed that he found it. He found metals that could not be duplicated in 1900. Now, he was a civil engineer that was part of the building of the. There was in Mexico at the time. He built the Trans-Isthmian Railroad at Tijuana, Mexico, and this railroad went across from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific side, and this was about 10 years ahead of the Panama Canal. So here was an engineer who was very, very astute in metals, in building, and he was convinced that this was from ancient civilization many, many thousands of years ago.
All right, let's go to the phones. Let's go to east of the Rockies. Ray, you're on Coast to Coast with us. Hi there.
Hi, George. And yes, I did feel the earthquake this morning, too.
Yeah, out there, and you're out in Taylorville, right? Illinois?
Right.
Okay.
My question / comment would be, that story sounds a lot familiar to the story you was telling about the guy that flew his plane over Antarctica.
That was Admiral Byrd.
Admiral Byrd, correct, yes.
And met some people there in the earth or something similar to it. And it makes me think that this is not an isolated type thing, that maybe this is, quite a few places around the globe that this could be happening.
There are many places that this is happening. If you and I've read the Hollow Earth theory. And matter of fact, I read it after I wrote this manuscript that I wrote and this research. But the Admiral Byrd theory came thereafter. But I said, it's interesting that this comes up because our planes today aren't allowed to fly over the North or South Pole. No commercial flights are allowed, and you just wonder why.
Did they have some kind of light source, according to J.C. Brown? I mean, if you look at, the Journey to the Center of the Earth movie, there was a little sun in the center, the core.
Well, he did, in the legend, he did not make reference to that. So in everything that I got, I would say I can't say unequivocally yes or say no. I was not made privy to that information by the research that I got. That I don't know.
So we don't know if they had an energy source that created light. We just don't know.
Right. What we do know is that there was a civilization that he claimed he found there that was ancient. He claimed the Lemurian, and he claimed that they were a technically advanced civilization that was still living within the hollows of the earth.
And they may still be there.
Yes.
West of the Rockies, you're on Coast to Coast with us. Hi there.
Oh, hi, George.
Hey.
I had a brief comment and a question.
Sure.
Also, it does sound like the story of the guy that in Death Valley that stumbled on some stuff and tried to mark the entrance and then couldn't find it. Sounded a lot like that story. But I was wondering if you were familiar with James Churchward, and he'd written a bunch of volumes of books on Mu. My mother was a Rosicrucian. She had them in her house. They described different kinds of beings that lived under there that supposedly they had left. Some of them had left. But one type of being was about 7 foot tall, and it had, instead of eyes, they had like a light-sensitive gland across their forehead. And I didn't take James Churchward very seriously, but then a friend of my sister's who knew nothing, had never heard of Lemuria, went up to Mount Shasta, and she was wandering around on the mountain, and she felt this high intelligence that kind of scared her. And she looked over the top of the bushes, and there were these 7-foot high beings with no eyes and a gland across their forehead, and she immediately sunk into this sleep and woke up a couple hours later, and the next day she found a cave that was illuminated. She couldn't find the source of illumination, and she felt the same kind of high energy. She went home and told her boyfriend, and he knew about Lemuria. He ran up there, and of course nothing happened to him, but I was kind of surprised that, because I didn't really believe those books when I read them when I was a teenager at my mother's house. But I wondered if you're familiar with James Churchward.
Well, I'm familiar with him because in my research, that was one of the books that I pulled to understand Lemuria, because once I discovered that this individual did exist, he went up to the mountain, I was able to figure out actually how it happened. I says, well, now let me look more into the research, because J.B. Body claimed, or J.C. Brown claimed, that he spent 30 years researching Lemuria. So Churchward's books was one of the first books that I was able to research, and I read that almost from cover to cover to understand what I was really dealing with in writing this story.
Somewhere along the line, there's got to be a family of J.B. Body or J.C. Brown, and they may know more about this, Stephen.
Well, it would be J.B. Body, and he died in Scotland. His heirs were in Scotland. I have here in front of me, I have his memoirs that I pulled from the book I told you about. But in the memoirs, at the end of it, it talks about, his wife. His wife was the one who was left, and his son had died before that. But here, I'll read it to you.
Sure.
John Benjamin Body was born on February 27, 1867, at Megavesi, Cornwall, England. He was the son of John and Mary Ann Harris Body. He was educated at the City of London College under Professor Harry Adams. So he was an educated man. He spent 6 years of training in Great Britain. He then proceeded to Mexico and worked for the Lloyd Cowdery Mining Company until his death. He devoted his whole life to the interests of one firm from 1890 to 1940. And he identified himself with Lloyd Pearson and Son Limited Civil Engineering Contractors, which, as I mentioned earlier, Lord Wheatman Pearson became the first Viscount Cowdery, and that's where the Lloyd Cowdery name came from, Lloyd Cowdery Mining Company.
So what's next? The book, the movie? What will happen to the legend of J.C. Brown?
Well, right now, I'm trying to get my agent to find me someone to make the movie. This is, I was on the Susan Northrup show 2 weeks ago, which I know you've had her on your show before.
Yeah.
And she had told me 30 years ago, George, that I was going to write a book. I was in her audience. She picked me out of the audience, believe it or not, and she said that 30 years later, I was in midlife, I was going to write a story that was going to be very well received by the world, and that a man by the name of Michael would help me. Well,
I'll tell you what. Get some more information to producer Lisa for me, Stephen, and I'll try to send it to a couple people I know as well that might be able to help you. It's an incredible story. Stephen Sindoni, our guest.